Hello, welcome to a new session. And today we are going to be talking about storytelling with data. The learning objectives for today's session is basically to summarize how storytelling techniques can make data more meaningful. And to start, we are going to use some quotas, quotes from different authors, and Susan Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of National Geographic magazine. Uh, she has a publication called The Race of Storytelling. And she's telling in that publication that we believe in the power of science, exploration, and storytelling to change the world. And that's something definitely that can happen. But we need to also be aware that data and the way that we present data is a powerful tool, and then we can create different stories and try to move conclusions based on that. Then Singer, in a data visualization, your secret weapon for storytelling and persuasion, tell us that in a world increasingly saturated with data and information, visualizations are a potent way to break through the clutter, tell the story, and persuade people to action. That's why when we look into social media and we look into all these visual interactions, those are effective way of interacting. Initially was the image, and now we are seeing how video can be really a powerful tool to convey messages. Then let's look a little bit into the basic concepts that we are going to be going, and we need to understand that data is going to provide us with much more than a backstory that we usually realize. There is much more there in the analysis of the data that we can tell about that. And when we start looking what's happening in the recent years, then we see how there has been a really increased interest and the potential of storytelling. Then if you look into New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, all these type of publications in journalism, they are incorporating dynamic graphics, they are incorporating interactivity in their way of conveying the news. And you can see also that politicians, activists, television, they use the same techniques as sometimes as a backdrop or sometimes with the main component to tell stories about global health, about economics, about the elections, about anything. And then we have these discussions, hey, what is real data, what are facts, and how we really verify them. Then, when we are thinking about storytelling, we are thinking about a mix of skills that incorporate computer science, statistics, artistic design, and storytelling. I don't pretend you to become a computer scientist. You need to have some statistics skills, but you are going to be computer savvy enough to use some of the tools that are going to help you tell those stories. And we are going to see through the evolution how there are recommended design techniques to be able to convey that story. Then if we think about what is the definition of data storytelling, because storytelling is, yes, you are telling this narrative and these successes events that happen. But when we are talking about data storytelling, is a process that we create that story, and the story is created with the data, the analysis that we create, and why we find in those analyses, and is going to allow the layman, laywoman to understand complex insights and apply those insights in decisions or actions. That's the formal definition that we can think about the data storytelling. But we need to really appreciate that the insight that we gain from data story or data analysis needs to be communicated to people that are not familiar with that data. That's the most important thing. You need to transform the data in a way that is easy to digest, that is easy to understand. Then when you craft a narrative or you shape this narrative, is a really effective way to communicate. And visuals are the easiest mediums of the brain to understand. That's why an image is worth 1,000 words. Then, when we have data storytellings and we incorporate visualizations, we are going to have a more effective way to present data. It's different when you are just telling the story about the data, but when you have visuals that actually represent what is going on there, is going to be more appealing. That said, we need to be careful because we can manipulate the scales, we can manipulate contrast, we can manipulate a lot of things in the visualizations in order to support the story. And we can influence in the way that people perceive the data. And that's one of those powerful tools that we need to be careful how we are going to be using that and be critical of how others are using that. Then, in definitely storytelling with data and data visualization is one of those skills that pretty much every single scientist and communicator in science should develop. But now that you are in a program of population health informatics, then it's kind of a requirement of the skills that we need to have. Then, if we want to have successful data stories, that's going to require a diverse of skills. And we already introduced some of them. But effective storytelling, you need to be kind of a movie director, okay? And it's not just to have the computer science and the computer engineer concepts. You need to develop those skills to bring different elements into practice. And then you need to really understand the context of the communication. Who you are talking to, what is the language that you're going to be using. Then you need to be able to use the correct visual design for that context. And of course, you need to understand data and how that data is going to feed that visual design and how that data needs to be presented in that context. And when we have the interaction between the visual design and data is where we have been talking about data visualization. Then what is the best way to present a data? How do we choose a chart? How do we convey a task? That's data visualization. When we have data and narratives, then we are doing data reporting. That is basically one of the exercises that we are going to have, and is how we take this data, we analyze that, and generate a narrative or a text or a series of paragraphs or a language about the interpretation of the data. And when we have all the elements, context communication, data, and narratives, is when we are really doing data storytelling. Now, let's travel on time and look into this graph. I don't know if you have seen this graph before or not, but this is one of those visual visualizations of data that has been historically known, and we are going to have a discussion about that. But this visualization is called the Minard's map of Napoleon's Russian campaign in 1812. And if you see, there is a lot of data that is communicated in this graph, and it's simple and you can navigate through that. Then just to give you some uh, insights of the of the um visualization. Then here we have the brown line is showing us the size of the army and the locations where they were present while they were campaigning through Moscow. Then they started here, and you see that some of them went in different ways, and we see a reduction of the number of individuals. And in black, we have the return and how different things happen. And for example, from here, this group reunited this group and then they continue back. And we can see really what was the impact of the time. And especially here we have temperature, the impact of temperature that is impacting the health of the people that were working on that campaign. There is something that is lacking because that is the time, and that's going to be one of those discussions because we have the space, we have additional data, but we don't really have concrete times when things happen. But it's a really good example of a data visualization, and that is getting close to a storytelling. Then the story is a powerful abstraction used by intelligence analysts to understand patterns, and is part of that analytic process. And when we have a story, we need to offer a context. Then we need to understand the audience, and we need to understand their tacit knowledge. We need to know what they expect or what they already know, because remember that knowledge is built on top of the previous information. And stories are really very useful mediums to communicate situations and information that is related in so many ways. Then when we have these stories, we can use them not only to support a discussion or support decision making, but we can use that to support the analysis process. And this is one of those important elements, how we create a story around the interpretation of the data that we are having. Then, a story or narrative, they are means to communicate sequence of events. And that's where the Minard's map is not supporting us really time, even though we have an insight of time because we assume that people is marching. Is really difficult to really pinpoint what the elements. We can have an insight using the temperature, and then we can use that as a proxy to the seasons, but it's not really directly with the sequence of events, even though we have the geographical representation. Then when we are telling a story is kind of art, no, because there is not a specific way of telling stories, and there are different styles, there are different approaches, and that's part of the art of that. When we make meaningful connections between data and ideas, then is when we create interest and we engage with our readers or spectators. And storytellers are basically integrating complex visualizations in the narrative. Then data stories differ from traditional storytelling. Okay, because traditional storytelling, you have the characters and then you describe them and then you describe the different elements, and it's a series of events with a controlled progression, no. But when we are having data stories, we are creating a is not that set of events and a controlled progression, but we can give some freedom for interaction. Then if we want to compare what is a narrative versus story, and we see that they are used as synonymous, then narrative is that macro structure of the document. What is the goal? What is the topic? While the story refers both as the structure and the content. Then we can have a narrative that is going to be the traditional fairy tale. And the traditional fairy tale, then you have the princess in distress, and then you have the savior. That's the narrative. Now the story, you see how that narrative that is repeated in several tales is presented in different ways when you have different characters that are representing those different traditional uh, uh, personas that are part of that narrative, but you can use that framework to create new things. Then that's kind of of the difference between a narrative as a big thing and a story that is the instance uh, of that theme. Then when we think about the structure of the narratives, then again we have seen it's a series of events, facts, and they have an order, and that order is going to help us to establish a connection between them. Usually in health, we use the timelines as a way of connecting them. And something that is central in the definition of the structure of the narrative is the causality of related events. Then something that precedes and influences the environment is going to create an effect. Then usually the stories are going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's the traditional storytelling narrative. Some of the tactics for the narrative is that we want to be able to order things, we want to provide some interactivity, and of course, we want to have a specific message that we want to transmit. And in that way, we can design data narratives in two ways. One is when it's author driven, and the other one is when it's reader driven. Then, if it's author driven, that I control the the narrative, then the scenes are going to be in linear order. Usually, it's a heavy messaging, and we remove the interactivity. That's when we have an author-driven narrative. As the movies, as the books, those are author-driven narratives. Unless we have those kind of books that you can choose the next thing that is going to happen and you jump to different pages, that we create some interactivity there. But if we have a narrative that is reader-driven, then there is not a prescribed order in the way that the story is telling. And there is not a specific message that we want to transmit, because the message is discovered by by the reader in the way that they interact with the data. And that's the particularity. There is a free interactivity with the data, and then they can draw their own conclusions and they can create their own story based on that data narrative. Then we know already that the visualization themselves may incorporate media that has text, images, video, and can also be interactive, no? And they can enable stories that where that telling relies uh, in both the reader and in the author, because we can just mix them in a way that we have predefined elements, but we allow the user to explore and interact a little bit. Then that's part of the middle land where we can find. Then we know again, and to reinforce, the graphical displays and image tell more than 1,000 words is really effective way of communication. And let's see an exercise. And this is a classical exercise that is called lifelines. Lifelines are visualizations about life events. And these two screenshots are from projects around the 90s. And you can see that in Lifelines, we can incorporate multimedia and some kind of interaction, and we can create playbacks and different representations to tell stories. But let me help you navigate through the stories. Then we have Linda. This is a female that since 92 to 94 was a smoker. Okay. Then going to use the pointer. Then she was a smoker. And at the beginning of 92, she was diagnosed with depression. And we see in the medications she was taking Prozac. Also, around that time, she had an appendectomy that required hospitalization and suffered of Lyme and arthritis. That they seems to be related in some way in the sequence of event. Starting in 94, she was diagnosed with obesity. And we can see that that patient came to several checkups, annual checkups, but she has special events because she was diagnosed with atrial flutter. That's a condition of the heart, and she required to come multiple times. You can see that here she was taking some drug for the heart. Okay. At the winter of 94, she started with a flu that it became a pneumonia. And you can see that that pneumonia required hospitalization, and the patient had at the same time EKG X-rays, and we can see how she was treated the flu initially with Ventolin, while the pneumonia required antibiotics. And after that, the patient required again these medications to open the bronchi. She started to complain of some knee pain, just 3 checkups, and that knee pain required a knee surgery. And you see that she was taking Advil before the surgery and just after the surgery a little bit, and required physical therapy for rehabilitation. Then she started to complaining of fatigue, but they realized that that was diabetes. And then they started some insulin, and it required a lot of blood tests. Since she was obese, they reduced the intake of salt. And because the different risks in immunization, we can see when she got the TB test, when she was covered with tetanus, and she was covered for this winter with flu to try to avoid a recidivit. And then you can see also here how different problems in the lifeline, like severe headache has lasted, seizures, smoker cessation, the thoracic outlet syndrome that has been resolved, and depression, and different allergies present. And this is the current time, and this is the future. We can see the future, and this flow is valid until this point. Then you can see when the different diagnoses are related with encounters, or when they appear in the story, and the different shift complaints, and different medications that this patient is taking. Then these are powerful tools, no, where just visual representation are telling a whole story, and we can just create that story in our mind. And if you haven't noticed, this patient that is diabetic, obese, she decided to get pregnant, and that's why we have the ultrasound that is associated with encounter, and we can see the baby. Then that's a good example. Then important, when you are telling a story, you need to think about who you are talking about, what you are telling, where it's happening, when it happened, why and how. And you can just circle those things back and forth. Then the visual storytelling is a critical in providing intuitive and fast exploration of very large data resources. And that's the role of us to summarize that. Then we need to understand the characteristics of the different types or genre of narratives that are going to match with a particular audience. And what are the advantages and disadvantages, and how that's going to affect the content and learning. Then you maybe don't want to talk to professionals using caricatures, but you may use caricatures to talk to kids. And that's something that we can explore in different ways of how we are creating avatars or how we are going to create different interactions. Then there is a quote there that a hypothesis is an assertion, and an elaborated hypothesis, it becomes a story. And that's basically something that we can use when we're writing proposals, research proposals, thinking about that. That if we elaborate in the hypothesis and we incorporate the who, when, what, why, how, that's going to be a better way of approaching that. Then some clues again, we need to understand the context. We need to choose an effective visual that we are going to be using. We want to eliminate clutter because we don't want to distract the audience. We want to focus the attention, highlighting the most important elements, and at the end we are going to be able to tell a story. When we are telling stories, we want to really uh, consider again who is the audience, what are the key messages that you want to convey, what questions might your visualization spur, do you have the answers to those questions, and what conversations can result. And if we want to have like a checklist, then when you have a well-told story, then you're going to be able to convey great quantity of information with few words. And the format has to be easily assimilated by the listener or the viewer. And people usually find easier to understand information that you put into stories, that information that is just spelled out as a series of a serial list or just calling numbers and things like that. It becomes just a landscape. And remember, images, they convey a lot of information and they can fill the gaps really easily. Then remember that for a persuasive data visualization, we want to use three elements. We want to use the data, we want to have a clear narrative, and then we are going to be using visuals to support that narrative. Then, if you have data and narratives, them together, they help us to explain. Okay, they provide the context for the data, where the data is coming from, why the data is relevant, what do you think, and you can help explain the audience what is that you are thinking and why is it important. When you have data and visualizations or data visualization, then that helps to enlighten. Okay, then it creates a clear representation of the data, what it means, and then you can highlight your interest. And when you have narratives and visuals, you can engage your audience. Then you have a clear and concise communications with good visualizations. Then you can grab their attention and be able to focus there. Then if we are thinking like steps, then the first, we need to create the story, okay? And one really good technique of writing stories is to start providing facts. And that's the and. This and this and this and this and this are the findings. But here is this gap, or here's the my appreciation, or here is the caveat, or here is the curve. Therefore, that is going to create a conclusion. You remember the end, the middle, and the end? This type of narrative, the and, the facts are creating that beginning. The but is creating the not, is creating the tension, is creating the the mystery or the engagement of the story, and that therefore is going to create that resolution at the end. It's really important. Once you are working your story, you really need to know your data, and then you need to choose the correct representation for that data when you want to tell the story. Also, when we are using styles, the idea is not to use more than 2 color palettes per visualization, and try to avoid things that are overlapping data or overlapping messages to avoid unwanted discussions. And if you want to use fonts, it's really important. If you see these different fonts, these are the fonts that has been studied that has the best readability in screen and on paper. Then Trebuchet, Times New Roman, Arial, Georgian, Calibri has demonstrated that they are really good to convey messages. Putting fancy fonts and over elaborated or with a lot of serifs can be confusing. Times New Roman is a serif font because it has those additional elements, but it's discrete as well as Georgia. Trebuchet, Arial, and Calibri that are considered sans serifs because you don't have those added elements to the font face. Then think about that and just incorporate a simple text that allows to have really good contrast. Okay, let's talk a little bit of examples of storytelling and some visualizations. Systems actually they have been to incorporate storytelling into the design. And those systems provide those first steps toward making richer stories and capabilities. Some examples then, we already know our voting data. And our voting data, we can create our own journeys, and we can use those visuals to integrate into our storytelling. Then just going to different topics as we have presented before, and let's say obesity, and we have food supply, and then here we have some timelines of total daily supply of calories per person between 61 and 2022. And you can just change those things and extract the visuals and just download or share or embed the data and be able to create this type of narratives. And you can reproduce narratives with the primary data that we have there. And these are predefined narratives, but if you go to the raw data, you will be able to create your own stories. Another tool that we are going to be exploring in detail is Tableau. Tableau is a platform that allow us to share data and make them publicly available, and the people can see our different visualizations. And Tableau has a version that is the Tableau Public, and that supports the construction and publication of those interactive visualizations. We are going to have a session dedicated to understand the use of Tableau, but that's a really, really powerful tool that we are going to be exploring. Just to give you an idea, Tableau Public, then here we have visualization of the day, It is sales quotas by Ceci Santiago, regional GIS quotas overview by tracking team performance against targets. And these are public visualizations, and we can create stories about that. Or we have here a dashboard about customers complaints dashboard by Hannah Lower, or the most subscribed channels to YouTube, and the most subscribed channels. Then YouTube is a massive online video platform where users can upload, share, and this. Then you see music, entertainment, blogs, gaming shows, and it starts to give us some insights. Then they have categories and channels and how they are related. And for example, music, the biggest channel here is T-Series. Or if we go to films, and this one is the rank number 2 is YouTube movies, then this is rank 15. I don't know where the rank number 1 is, or maybe this is rank over YouTube. And this is an example of how we can create storytellings and timelines that we were presenting initially. Then we can create those time series, and in conclusion, it's a really interesting and powerful tool that we are going to be exploring on detail in the future. Uh, Other example of storytelling is Gapminder, and they created a storytelling tool for the Human Development Index. And I'm going to give you the link, then you can watch the different elements.
Anna, and I run Gapminder, a non-political foundation dedicated to fighting common misunderstandings about the world. Welcome to this course on the UN Global Goals. Let's start with a quick test to check what you already know. It will only take about 3 minutes. Write down your score to compare later, as you will take the same test again at the end of the course.
And this is really useful to understand how the different United Nations goals has been achieved or not. And as you see, you can animate the data, you can measure your understanding, and create other things. It's a cool tool to use. Um, then now we have AI generating storytelling. And there are so many examples that we can explore. I will tell you that AI Story Generator is an Android app where you can create narratives, and it creates stories. Then you provide the prompt, and it creates really interesting stories. It's not powerful in the visual side, but at least creating the narrative and creating the story is really interesting and fun. And Storytell that AI is a tool that is powered by Claude in the backend, one of the generative AI. And then this is a brief exercise that I conducted where I asked the tool to how do you compare the incidence of prevalence disease, the preventable diseases in USA compared with the rest of the world, and the vaccination coverage for each of them. Then it creates different tasks. Then it has reasoning. It do some web searches, then they do some knowledge search, and it create an answer. No? Then it create preventable disease and vaccination coverage, user versus the world, and then it provides some data in some of the elements and provides us with some evidence. Then now it's able to create a table where it's showing all the cases in the 20th century and the case in 2024, and how things are changed until 2024. Now it analyzed the critical trend in 2025 that is happening, and then how things are changing in the world, what happening in Europe. But you see, the data is there, but it's kind of disorganized. No, it gives me the option to create images, and I say yes, create two distinct images for the answer, how it's compared for the same prompt, and analyze the text. Then it created this image. But as you see, actually we had MMR data that is not presented across all the countries. Then it is not clear what this bar is representing and why polio is interrupted. Then it failed a little bit there. Here we have percentages, but here we have absolute numbers that is incongruence there, and improving trend in lower middle in countries. We don't really know how is support, but the thing that is kind of highlighting and important is, hey, herd immunity, we need to have a 95% of coverage, and none we have in the world. Okay. Then the other one is the impact of vaccination. You said the disease, it misspelled that in reduction in 2020 century versus 2024. And as you see, it failed actually in creating the two bars for every single thing. And here it just with a case, and it is not clear, it's not consistent in the way that it presents the numbers and what the different things represented. Then we need to be careful with these tools. They are improving. They are really useful in help you create a story, but don't really rely on them to create the actual visualizations. But you can use that as an inspiration and then go from there to finalize your data visualization, your dashboards, or your storytelling. Then how you can enhance the message? Then you need to have a headline for every single slide or piece of information. Consider photography, not only graphs, but photography or icons are going to help illustrate what is going on. Highlight the important data as changing the color or making more contrast. Don't use a chart if you don't need one. You can put that in the narrative, no? And use the minimal that you want to have there, because you don't want to have noise. And don't put data that is not contributing to the story or the narrative that you want to tell. Then storytelling visualization has the boundaries of several fields, as we have seen. From computer graphics, computer visualization, cognitive psychology, and there are different theories about storytelling social science. What is important is that Minard's map that we presented at the beginning is often cited as an example of visual storytelling. But as we presented and we said, it doesn't have really the element, especially the one that is the add line progression through time. It's tacit, but it's not actionable in that regards. And that's not the problem, but that's a food for thought, no? Then in conclusion, visualization is a powerful tool that is not limited to information visualization. Then if we want to tell a story, we need to augment that visualization with other type of communication. We need to put text, we need to put audio, video, we need to link more information. Then in that way, we have an augmented visualization and start telling stories. Then having a scatter plot or slope graphs, they are not really useful for analysis. We want to be using better representations that we explored before, and we are going to be reinforcing. And you want to provide different views of the same data to make them easy to understand, no? And tell stories about the data, tell stories about your interpretation, tell stories about what you are getting out of the data. And that's a natural outcome when you use, for example, visualization in collaborative settings. In the future, Questions that we need to consider is, are current storytelling platforms considering the role of the author and supporting the authorship process and what's happening there? What forms of narrative structures and visuals best apply to storytelling visualization? That's part of the question that we still need to clarify in research. Are static transitions or the dynamic transition more effective for storytelling in visualization? Can visualization increase the memorability of data, information, or knowledge? Does storytelling and visualization aid with data interpretation? What is the most effective way to engage the audience? No, and these are questions that we have not complete answers yet, and we're still working on that. In the future, the research is going to be looking for deeper understanding of the strategies for storytelling, how we visualize, and how we need to develop those visuals. Then we need to evaluate different visualizations based on time and how to complete specific tasks and what are the accuracy of the responses. Okay, and that's interesting questions. What are the meaningful metrics that we can have to measure in engagement, to measure interest, recall, or decision support? Then in general, there's a need for really study these techniques and the effectiveness in the different ways that we storytell. Then I hope that this inspires you. I am looking forward for the discussion. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, night, morning. See you next time.